My name is Andy. I think I'm in the process of educating myself about racial injustice, other forms of injustice, and it started because I wanted to be a part of something, but I think what I found was it gave me the ability to explore kind of a greater sphere. So it's been a big learning experience.
That's outstanding. Glad you're here. Yeah.
My name is DJ. Chaplain Cole mentioned to me about Teach the Truth Thursdays that were going on, and I thought it was a great opportunity to learn just about race and the intersection of Athens and how that comes into play, and especially continuing to learn about Linnentown.
Thanks. Hey, I'm Chaplain Cole Napper, and I'm one of the administrators, I guess, with Beth Mendenhall, and I'm super excited to be here.
John. But I wanted to be here because this is an important topic, and all the topics are very important. And I'm proud of what has occurred with T3, and I wanted to be here in person today.
Yeah, glad you're feeling better.
Sure. Hi, my name is Denise Santa. I grew up in Athens, so a lot of Athens' history is very important to me, like both personally and then also it informs a lot of my work. And so I'm really appreciative of a lot of the work that's been done around Linnentown and around Athens history.
Thanks. And let's go, let's see, let me make sure I'm not muted. I'm not muted. Let's go first to.
You got Hattie Whiteheaded on here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm gonna let
Okay.
Barb, can you say hello? And then Miss Hattie, we'll go to you.
Okay.
Good evening. Glad to be here. And it's so nice to see Miss Mocha. I am here because I am very active, involved, volunteer with AADM, and have been attending all of these sessions, and I've learned a lot. I did read Miss Whitehead's book, and so I feel like it's not nice to, I always love hearing from the author. And of course, I enjoyed your presentation in the fall, Dr. Garrett. And so and to be able to also learn from a in-service teacher, Mr. Smith, that's also really exciting for me. So thank y'all.
Thanks. And Miss Hattie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Hattie Thomas Whitehead, and I'm a first descendant of Linnentown. And I wrote the book, Giving Voice to Linnentown, because I wanted our students, our community, to learn about local history. And I wanted them to have a book to read and to pass on. I also met Dr. Garrett, and the first time I met him, on the very first time I met him, I asked him to create a lesson for Linnentown. So teachers will be able to teach this, what happened about Linnentown, how it led to its erasure. So I appreciate the work that he's doing and continuing to do. But as an activist, I will continue to push forward on the things that we need to do here in Athens, in the state of Georgia.
So glad to have you here with us. And it's a little humbling and maybe a little intimidating even to have Hattie here, and we're supposed to be teaching a lesson about Linnentown. So I want to give a little context too about Hattie and I met in August last year, and like she said at that first meeting, said, hey, I want, make a lesson for teachers. And I said, okay. And what I did was not that. Like, I talked to as many people as I could. It was like I could make a lesson, but I could read the newspaper and whatever and make a a lesson, but I was like, no, I need to. So I met with Joey Carter.
Yes.
And I met with, I had several conversations with Miss Hattie and Mariah Parker and Chaplain Cole and Jerry Shannon, who's in the geography department, and Liz Rice in the geography department, Jen Rice in the geography department, because I wanted to make sure that I was learning from people who had been working on this project from the beginning. I didn't just want to say, all right, well, here's a lesson. And meanwhile, while I was doing that, while I thought I was getting smarter, I think I was getting smarter about Linnentown and what lessons about it might look like. Meanwhile, other folks were already doing it. So it was happening at UGA in the geography department, in the art education program, and in the art school. And it was happening in schools also. So at Cedar Shoals High School, teachers were teaching about it. Montu Miller was teaching about it. He's going to teach the True Thursdays next week. A little plug for Montu, and at Clark Central and at Clark Middle. So my point in all this is that, like, the work that Hattie and the Linnentown Project's doing has a life of its own, and it's being mobilized throughout different educational spaces in Athens. And what I think is what I want to acknowledge is that is a testament to Hattie, your leadership. Knowing that is your goal, and like helping people feel invited and empowered to teach people about Linnentown, I think is just a model of collective leadership. So really humbled to have you here.
Thank you.
So I think, you know, I was wondering about a good question to start with. And initially it's like, what do you have to know to know about Linnentown? Because my sense is that people here more or less know the story. So if you were thinking about it as an educator, what would you want to know? But another question came up as people were introducing themselves, if you don't mind, like pull a little audible, which is like, when did you first hear about it? Like, what do you remember about the first time? When was that? Where were you? What did you think? So if you have, and Hattie, obviously you can't play
No.
in this one.
Yeah, you
I'm not gonna play.
Can I start on that one just as the teacher? So I've been teaching 15 years now, and the majority of that in both in Athens, Clark County, and in other districts, Georgia studies. And so sadly, Linnentown was something that I learned this year. And I'm local to Athens for most of my life. I lived somewhere in the shadow of the arches for a majority of adulthood, but Linnentown was not something that ever came up in a classroom, never came up in anything professionally until we started as a social studies team this year, digging into local history and making the concerted and intentional effort to learn the local history of Athens in order to teach our kids. And then Linnentown kind of came out for me. And so that was something that I was really upset about, because I mean, this is important stuff. This is critical stuff to know, but it wasn't until this year when we actually started to be intentional about these kind of things that it fell on my radar. So, you know, so that.
Thanks. Other folks?
I'll say, I know that the first time that I had ever heard the word Linnentown was about 3 years ago when I was in college. It was incredibly.
Is your audio on?
I don't know.
And your video is not on either. So I'm just concerned about the people who are online.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So what I was saying is that, like, I first heard the word Linnentown when I was in college at UGA, which was incredibly upsetting because I've been in the Athens Clark County School District for all of my life. But I learned about it through Joey Carter. And I think he and Hattie Whitehead were hosting a protest. And that is when I kind of like first heard about Linnentown itself. And I was kind of upset at the time because I was like, this is kind of a very important history that I felt like I should have known when I was growing up, especially the fact that it was so close to all the schools that I went to. And definitely impacted a lot of people that I knew who grew up in that same kind of area, because a lot of those people were displaced. So it would have been like very useful knowledge to have. But yeah.
Get involved, because at the time I was just, it was unbelievable to me, you know what I mean, to hear the stories. But I remember, being that I'm an activist and I'm into civil rights and all that kind of stuff, it was the most, we always asking for reparations. And the thing to me, it was like, well, this is really easy. This is tangible form of reparation. You saw where these folks lived. You see where the dormitory is at now. You understand the impact. So it was like real life history, you know? So even as an educator, the books, the social justice, the social study books, the books that we use, they don't really teach us the in-depthness of history, especially local history. So this was fascinating to me because it was like something real, and you lived it, and you could walk on that street and see, you know, what happened there. So it was like very impactful. So it was around 2020 that I heard about it. Yeah.
Yes, I'll go. I learned about Linnentown fairly recently. So, speaking of mentioning that you could walk past that dormitory, I was actually walking past that dormitory with a coworker, and they actually brought up Linnentown and the history of, you know, the area and what it meant and things like that. So I was actually shocked myself that, you know, there's now a dorm standing there. The people who once lived there have been moved to different parts of Athens. Some may not even no longer live here. And I thought that was kind of crazy that history was, I think, as Denise was mentioning earlier, like that's very local history that is very important, that a lot of people are just, you know, being made aware of fairly recently, despite the fact that, you know, Miss Hattie and folks who went through that are in the city and live here today.
Mm-hmm.
This is Barb. It was 2 years ago, I think. It was
And I think it
when-
might have been Mocha, actually, was the first one to mention it to me. And I was here in this office when Miss Whitehead's book was here. And I remember I purchased the book right then. I was very grateful that Miss Whitehead, that you did write the book, because it's really essential. It's so important. And I had no idea. I mean, I had heard some things about how the college had been invasive in the community and all that, but I didn't know the details at all. And to read your book really brought it home for me, that it was extremely powerful and very well worth reading. And I'm so glad you did write that. And I'm so glad these gentlemen are here teaching it. So I'm grateful.
Mm-hmm.
Heard about it 2 weeks ago. I think it had been brought up through Mariah Parker's social media, and I wasn't sure. And Denise mentioned it, and I went home and looked it up. And I think just recently, you know, I've been reading more, and it just kind of struck me. Like how terrible it is to that something like that would happen, and like the way it's being responded to kind of seemed disingenuous, and like it just really kind of yeah, just I'm sorry.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Barb, did you want to jump in?
Sure, yeah, it was 2 years ago. It was when I think there was some mention on Facebook. I think Broderick Flanagan helped people become more aware of it on social media. And I kind of heard it in passing too. Sometimes I'd be out in neighborhoods and somebody would just, and I don't even remember a specific person who mentioned it, but they just made the reference to Linnentown. Hey, have you heard what's going on? You know, the history of Linnentown, that kind of thing.
I think, one thing that I'm noticing as people share is just to like, think about the range of people that we're mentioning, of like where everyone encountered the history of Linnentown. It's from colleagues, it's from friends, it's from social media, from activists, organized and not, and like just walking by and seeing a protest. And I think when we think about teaching Linnentown, all those things have to be included in our thinking about what counts as teaching. So if it's just what happens in classrooms, we're only going to be disappointed, because not all teachers are on the same page about saying like, this is the thing that we need to teach to our students. It's not, and like we can invite people in and change some minds, but we won't. I don't think that's going to be the thing. And so thinking about education as all of our work about like informing people and then helping them understand more, like pointing them towards next steps. And then the thing is like Linnentown, and Hattie, please feel free to jump in and interrupt me when I get something wrong, that like Linnentown was lived by the folks in the neighborhood. They were dispersed. And it really is this amazing story about a university researcher who was on a different project. This is Joey Carter again, on a different project, about wage suppression in Athens and at UGA. And he found this file box about urban renewal, and it struck a chord in his mind. Like, I think I remember hearing something about a neighborhood. Is this that neighborhood? And then started asking from there. Is that right, Hattie? And then they contacted you? Hattie might have stepped away. That's what I remember Miss Hattie telling me. And that was in 2018. And so from 1959 to 1967, when that neighborhood was being demolished, until 2018, the only official record of Linnentown are in these boxes of government receipts about the valuation of folks' homes. They're being labeled as dilapidated, and then a record of how they were torn down, bulldozed, burned, etc. So, and Linnentown is never named in any of those documents. It's the slum area on the other side of Cloverhurst or whatever street that is. I can't remember. And so when we're thinking about, like Chaplain Cole and Mocha, you were talking about like the importance of history. What is so critical about the movement for redress and reparation is that movement brings Linnentown into the historical record. It's not there otherwise as Linnentown. It's on there as receipts of the expansion of the university, but it's not in there as such as a neighborhood where folks lived and played. And like, my favorite passages in Hattie's book, and when I hear Hattie speak in front of groups, is like listening to her memories of being a child, and talking about her older brother caring so much for her as to make like rope swings to swing over the creek. Like, that is something that, unless Hattie had written that, all we have is our imaginations about it. And just the crucial nature of having that be in place. So Hattie's book, I've got a slide later that shows like how the story of Linnentown has just in 3.5 years, proliferated nationally. So there's local media, there's national media coverage. So it's like a really important case study, I think, for youth especially, because it's a great case example of how a relatively small number of people who are committed and who have energy can really.
Yeah, and so from a history teacher's point of view, when we, by naming Linnentown, by bringing to the forefront that was a place with people, with stories that matter, with, like you said, with those memories, listening to Hattie. I had the privilege of hearing Hattie at one of our little meetings, And listening to her describe her childhood growing up, it wasn't that different from the childhood I grew up with, as far as just playing with, neighborhood kids and rope swings and all that. So it was very familiar. But when we name it, we give it life, we give it power. Whereas when it is nothing more than, blips on a receipt covered, stuffed in a box, it's just a thing. And there's an alleviation of responsibility without its name. But once it has been named, then it forces someone to take eventually someone's going to take accountability and own it and make right. And so it's a lot harder to ignore that when it has the power of its name and its memory.
Yeah, it's legitimized or
Legitimate. Yeah, look,
yeah.
it's always been legitimate. But it
Yes.
is a lot harder to hide the injustice when there is an actual name and story
Right.
to go with those receipts and that paperwork, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. I don't know if anybody, I saw some faces that I might be interpreting as like somebody wanting to say something or a thought that you want to share. If that's the case, please don't hesitate.
Like you said, the receipts and the papers didn't name it down. And so when we speak of things being erased systemically, how the system is able to capitalize off of erasing portions of history or not telling the entire truth. If he didn't discover that box and all of these things didn't connect, and they tried to denounce social movements, if it wasn't for activism, if it wasn't for volunteers, if it wasn't for the researcher, all of those things, the truth would have never been brought to the forefront. Now, I understand back then, in order for you to obtain wealth, portion of that is for you to own property and to own land. And by displacing those people, they took away the opportunity for that family to own wealth, generational wealth. So there's so many injustices in that one act that is never going to really be corrected. So it's even showing me that when you're able to pinpoint an issue, because you hear reparations and they're like, how are we going to pay reparations? This is a very tangible, pinpointed way of how you can pay reparations for the harm that you've caused, because legacy and generational wise, you have stolen from these people. You've taken land, you've taken the opportunity of us or them being obtaining wealth and sustaining themselves. And then when Black people are struggling in today's society, people are like, well, they could have worked harder, they could have pulled up their bootstrap. It doesn't matter. Your situation can be stolen from you.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what people don't want. That's the truth. They don't want for the students and folks to see, in order for it to keep perpetuating, just keep recycling and just keep the injustice keep occurring.
Right. Right. That's the fear, right? The reactionary fear about what would happen if kids knew about this.
Right.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing all that stuff. That's interesting. I mean, my own was not dissimilar, like through various, following AADM and Mariah Parker, and you like, what is this? It was in the red and black, and then it was UGA had a panel, similar to what you were talking, and it's like heard, and then it really, got on everyone's radar. So when we think about, I'm going to transition to thinking about teaching Linnentown. What we wanted to do with our time that we have left is just share what we do when we teach it. So it's like, there's not a perfect way. I'm just kind of going to share two examples, but we have some broad commitments about what we recommend that people do when they teach about Linnentown and teach from Linnentown, is that there's at least three different components to it. So one, like a thriving working class Black neighborhood, like Moki, you were just saying, like high levels of home ownership, and so therefore wealth accumulation, high levels of community cohesion. And then this urban renewal, destruction of Linnentown, that period. So like talking about the facts happened there. And I think that it would really be a tragedy if people talked about those things and didn't talk about 2018 to present. Because without it, there isn't the story. Like we wouldn't know about it if not for the Linnentown project. We really wouldn't. That's also a fact. And so like these are the three things that we have as like kind of underlying commitments to when that we see in common to what people are up to. And I think like we've already touched on this based on the stories we've shared, but what do we hope to gain from teaching about Linnentown? And are there potential harms in teaching about Linnentown? And that's something that is hard for me. I find it to be like a wholly positive thing to share an historical truth, one that has a lot of purchase in the current moment. But I do also know that teachers are very worried about their livelihoods. They feel under the gun, they feel scrutinized, and rightly so, because the state legislature is passing laws that puts them in harm's way. Not in the same sense as the residents of Linnentown were in harm's way, and I'm not equating those things or those positions, but it's putting people in harm's way nonetheless, because it emboldens reactionary individuals to capitalize on a backlash that began as soon as the anti-racist uprising started in the summer of 2020. So we saw that backlash build almost immediately, and now it's really coming into full view through these legislative acts. And so when I think about potential harm, like I do imagine some teachers saying like, I'm just not sure how I feel about it. And I just think it's important to acknowledge those realities as being real.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very real thing. It is something that we've all talked about. You know, my colleagues that I've worked with teaching these type of things this year, it was a conversation that our principal had with us. How comfortable are you of going against the system? That, and this is back in August before, you know, state legislatures even started this. This was back before Florida started doing their thing. Everybody just kind of started following, you know, all of that. This was, you know, how do we feel? And thankfully, we, you know, at our school had the community support behind us, and so there wasn't really a lot of fear because we knew that push came to shove, our community would dive in and would help us out. And so I will throw this out into social media that yes, teachers are afraid. And one of the ways to alleviate that fear, alleviate that stress and that problems is for the community to rally behind them and to support them and to stand on their behalf, because while it's not the same as the crosshair, you know, as the trauma and the hardships of Linnentown, it's a way to silence the voice of the teacher, which is one voice that is needed for our students so that we can learn this stuff. And so in order to get this into a classroom, especially now, throw your support behind your teachers, let them know that you have their backs and that, you know, to do what they do because they're not alone and that you're going to support them on that. And so I just throw that out there.
Yeah.
I know that's needed.
And I'll say that like Clark County schools have been supportive of all the efforts that I know of. And to my knowledge, there's been no administrative pushback on any teacher who's wanted to teach about Linnentown. And I believe Miss Hattie's been welcomed every place that she's been invited. I don't think any place has said no to having Miss Hattie come and present about her book and present to kids, get elementary, middle school, and high school. So that's credit to CCSD in my view.
And I do want to say that goes for UGA sororities as well. I have spoken to a number of the Philhellenic sororities, and so that they have been very welcoming as well.
That's great. That's great. Mocha, you were going to say?
Bills that they've passed, it could be more restrictive for teachers presenting these things in the classroom, depending on what is in the language or the context that's being used. So we do have to be careful because of these new bills that are being passed, and it's a way of tying teachers' hand. And the fear factor is also to prevent us from teaching the truth. When no one ever came to me and said, okay, before you talk about the Civil War, let's talk about how you're going to present about the Confederacy, or how no one ever comes, or when you're talking about slavery and you know, back then, they didn't come into the classroom and try to dictate how you present that lesson. you have a guideline on what you can and what you cannot do. So everyone they should know that. You have a guideline that you should follow. And so when I look at how they're moving, it's a way, now it's important because we want to tell the truth. We want to talk to you about not just what's in this textbook, but the deeper context of where this came from and how this is impacting us from the past, the present, and how we can impact you in the future. They don't want us to talk about that. So they want to make it seem like teachers are going to do something harmful to students, which historically we're teachers. And I will say that we need support from the community, but in order for us to spark this change, teachers have to come together. We have to stand strong collectively together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I really appreciate that. And I do, yeah, I see a really strong network of justice-minded educators in Clark County that's already in place, that's network that we can build on around those efforts. And yeah, the landscape's changing very quickly. And so it is important to look at that legislation very carefully, to look at what it says and also what it doesn't say. So just real quick, we wanted to present just 2 examples of ways that Linnentown can be taught in classrooms. So I'm gonna hand it over to Ethan to talk about what he did with Clark Middle School, and I'll share briefly about what I did with social studies teacher candidates last fall. So I'll hand it over.
Do you want to start with the videos?
I don't think we have time.
You don't want, okay, no, that's fine. They're probably 3 or 4 minutes apiece.
3 or 4 minutes apiece.
Yeah.
I think
We're good?
So,
Okay.
yeah, if you want to go through the activity that you had
Okay.
about the videos before, because when we taught Linnentown, we used both of these videos. The first one that I used to introduce it to, and just for a little bit of context, I teach 8th grade, which is 13, 14-year-olds. My classes are probably 50-50 white and black students, and along those very same lines, wealthy, poverty, and you know, white, wealth, black, poverty. I mean, it's literally that stark the contrast in my classrooms. And so this is how we introduced the concept of Linnentown, was with a news story out of Denver, Colorado.
I don't know.
If it works.
Are people seeing this? Barb, is the news? Okay, so we'll see if it loads. Baby steps. It's happening. It's happening. That's downtown Athens.
See if you can move the bar.
What they can take.
Cannot come by here without associating what could have been.
Hattie Whitehead and Bobby Crook
See, this was a hill.
grew up where 3 dorms now stand.
This is a picture that was taken in 1947.
They knew it as Linnentown.
Linnentown was a small Black community. Adults worked hard and they reached 66% home ownership. Community felt safe. The whole city didn't feel safe, but the community, you felt safe.
It was. But in the early 60s, the university and the city marked Linnentown for urban renewal. They used eminent domain to make space for new dorms and move families out.
Taking property, particularly targeting Black communities. It means that they want the land and they want it cheap. So this is a way that you can get it cheap, all under the name of the law.
In the 50s and 60s, the federal government gave more than $13 billion for urban renewal projects. Those projects moved out hundreds of thousands of people, largely people of color, in all but 7 states. Institutions wielded power and served some above others.
I'm not just reporting on this city and this university. I was a student here, a graduate student in the journalism school, a school named for an old newspaper editor that once declared the white race was superior. How would you rate race relations in Athens, Georgia today?
I think they're mixed.
Mayor Kelly Gertz presides over a city where nearly 3 in every 10 residents are Black. Among students at UGA, it's fewer than 10%.
Board of Regents has been named by the last 3 conservative governors of the state. I think there are times when they've not wanted to touch these issues with a 10-foot pole.
But it's not just campus. It's the lack of affordable housing. It's the bar downtown called General's that until last year was named for a Confederate general. It's the first site off the highway being the Plantation Buffet. It's the tensions in the institutions that bubble under cities and towns across America.
This is my home. This is my blood, sweat, and tears. It's as though we have been left behind. And I say we, I mean Black people.
In terms of census tracts and demographics, I mean, it's evident that Black Athenians have long held per capita far less wealth than white Athenians. That's just a fact. And I've got to be conscious of that and ask how we move the meter on that. Apology is a strength.
This past February, the city passed a resolution to honor Linnentown and commit to reparations for its descendants, the first act of reparations in the state.
And to all Athenians, a deep and sincere expression of apology and regret.
People told me they thought that would never happen. But when it happened and we put this program together for him to read it, it just brought me to tears. Like, finally, we got an apology.
There are many hurdles. It's unclear how much the community will receive. The Georgia Constitution prevents giving state and local dollars directly to third parties, and the university has declined to participate in the Linnentown project or approve any markers of recognition on campus property. The tension persists, born of history, sustained by lack of trust. And yet,
You emerge from this whole thing with hope.
Yes. And faith has been recognized in a small way. So it makes a difference.
in Athens, Georgia, I'm Matt Pearl.
So that is the like straight ahead fact way to introduce Linnentown to students, and that's what Ethan says he's going to do next time.
Yeah. So I did show them that video once we started talking about Linnentown and introduced what Linnentown was, and when they watched it, students are kind of just like staring at the screen going, really? This happened. And I'm going to get into some of the student comments in just a minute. But yeah, so we started out with this next video, which is a little bit more difficult for 13, 14-year-olds to kind of wrap their head around. It's a council meeting with Mariah Parker, which Mariah is phenomenal. She has spoken to my classes about activism and getting involved. But when they watch this video, I think next time around, this might be a little bit later in the lesson, just for the sake of the complexity that the video presents.
And when we were talking as a small team, talking about like how to open it, the idea was to show this and have students guess, like, what is this about? Like, what do you think's happening here? And you'll see maybe why.
I like to remind everyone of like a couple of things. When we had a showing like this last time, it was about cats. And you know what we did about those cats? We did something. And it didn't take a lot of nice words about how significant it's gonna be when we finally figured out what to do. It didn't take any conversation about compromise. We acted swiftly. to ensure that justice was had for the cats, y'all, for the cats. But when it comes to the breakup of Black communities, suddenly we need to all come together and sing Kumbaya, and suddenly we need to like sit down and make sure that the white men sitting behind this rail have control over the process by which we come to decide what justice looks like. Even in the face of the oppressed community coming before us, having done all of the work of deciding what justice looks like for them. When we sit in their faces and talk about compromise and talk about how we're gonna figure out something significant to do at some point, some way, somehow, that is white supremacy still. Oh, that's right. That is white supremacy still. Months ago, we came together to sign and pass a resolution denouncing white supremacy in our community. And I reminded us then that those pretty words on that paper meant nothing if we did not take action to ensure that the people of color in our community felt safe here and felt at home here. So this is our time to act. This is our time to act, y'all. Those words on that pretty little piece of paper are calling us to do something now.
God bless her. Man.
I know.
But yeah, as a teacher, I think that the entirety of this video, like to show it up front, literally when you ask the kids after they hear it, like, you know, what Mariah was talking about, the first thing they all go is cats. And so I would show this later in my lesson. And the reason I would actually do that is for something that she just said. And that is this idea that the oppressor doesn't get to decide what justice looks like for the oppressed. That in and of itself for me next time is going to be an entirely separate lesson of its own within this, because there's so much that can be taught in that little bit right there. And so I put together, do you want to give me share rights? And I can,
I'll just roll
you want to
through
pull
them,
it up? That's fine. And so I kind of fleshed out, just for the purpose of tonight, a series of slides for Linnentown. And what I will do is kind of walk you through it. I won't read every single slide for the sake of time, but the information that I presented. And then that first slide, if you want to fill it up. A little bit of context in just the teaching. The teaching timeline is we had just finished a unit on the Civil War, Reconstruction. So our kids were in that mind frame of Black and white issues, working together within the country. We spent a unit talking about the rise of Jim Crow in the South and how Jim Crow is just another version of slavery under the law. Going from the 19th and 20th century, we focused on racial violence. Because we had the permission from our administration, we just kind of no holds barred. We're just going to dive in this, and we're going to get uncomfortable, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to teach the truth.
Yeah.
And so we really dove in on racial violence, voter suppression, segregation, the impact of the rise of the KKK, and we did it through the lens of local history. Our theme for the year in Georgia Studies was, what's your story within Georgia's history? Where is your story? Because we really wanted to make this personal for our students. And you can't do that when 50% of your class is Black and brown. You can't just come at it from a white perspective, which is kind of which is really what the curriculum does for us. And so we did a lot of research in local Athens history when it came to racial violence, voter suppression here in this community, what segregation looked like here, lynchings that occurred in this area, and things like that, the KKK and its rise in this area. We kind of traced that timeline from that to the developments in the Deep South following World War I, World War II, farming technological advancements that caused the Great Migration, which was basically a movement of Black people from rural South into the cities, which caused all sorts of chaos in the cities. This is where your race riots came out in the early 1900s. we highlighted the impacts of how Jim Crow impacted that. And then you get into the civil rights movement, how Georgia reacted to Brown versus the Board of Education, and things like that. And so that's kind of where we felt Linnentown would really fit. And that story would really fit because, again, it's local. And so what we kind of did was we kind of decided to start talking about what Linnentown was, you know, a Black community in the early 20th century, down Baxter Street, completely erased by Athens, you know, the city of Athens, UGA. And our kids are just kind of looking at me like, what is this? Because again, the majority of your students live in the shadows of UGA football and, you know, and this big, huge, beautiful university that brings jobs and, you know, all these people, we don't talk bad about UGA mentality. And so we kind of introduced Linnentown as just this Black community that was erected and stood strong, where now 3 dormitories are. And then, so this is how I introduced it. Athens, Georgia community that lived life under Jim Crow, shared troubles, hardships, segregation, low wages, racial discrimination, all of that. But one of the things that I felt was important, it's something that I've learned just this year, was that as important as the trauma and the hardships that Black and Brown communities have endured, that we can't just stop there. And we have to bridge the gap between today and yesterday. I think that's kind of the loophole legislators are finding when passing a lot of these new bills, is that if we teach history in the linear, we can sit there and say that this happened then, but if we don't teach our kids how to connect then and now, it's a far off thing, and our kids lose the impact that it has on us today. And, you know, we can talk about racism 50 years ago, but if that's where we leave it, then what goes on today doesn't connect with it. But the other thing that I want to stress to our teachers in the future, and something that I feel like I need to do better, is not only teaching the trauma that our Black and Brown communities have endured, but highlighting Black positivity, Black and Brown positivity and growth. Black and Brown communities are more than their trauma. They are more than the hardship. They are more than slaves, descendants of slaves, and victims of these rape. All of that is necessary, but if that's all we teach, then we are further victimizing, if that makes sense, further victimizing our Black and Brown communities. And so one of the things that I wanted to throw up was that Linnentown was a strong Black community that was full of skilled professionals and workers, plumbers, teachers, electricians, 85% home ownership and better. And so, yes, they were under the shadow of Jim Crow, but they were not just surviving. They were a thriving Black community. And I think that that's important for all of us teachers to start teaching in the future, is Black positivity. You know, the Black communities are no longer, they're not just the victims of white, they are survivors and fighters, and they have learned to thrive at that. And I think that that helps us go from just being just simple anti-racist in the background, but that allows the white community, the co-conspirators, throw that out to Bettina Love for teaching me that word, to come together and fight for this. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to keep stressing. And so we dove into the history. And this, again, this is way more information than I gave my 13 and 14-year-olds. Just for sake of time, we highlighted eminent domain, urban renewal, and the fact that urban renewal is a really fancy way of saying, let's tear down the ghettos, and let's tear down the slums, and let's build big, nice, shiny things to make white people comfortable. And that's really kind of how I phrased it. And it just happens that these slums and these ghettos are predominantly, disproportionately Black and Brown communities. And I know you're going to talk about naming names.
Yes.
But I found a quote from the mayor of Athens at that time. We feel that we have a mutual problem. Urban renewal would correct, and we trust that it will be possible for you to accept our invitation. a community that boasted 85% home ownership is not a ghetto in a slum. But because it was a Black community right literally across the street from white communities, it was deemed that, which made it possible for UGA and the state governments to work together to knock it down. And within 6 years, these families are thrown what's the word I'm looking for? Displaced. Displaced. That's it. They're displaced and they are forced out for what is today a parking lot and student dorms.
Can I add on to what you just said?
Absolutely.
All right, because in addition to their legislation behind getting rid of these communities, the whole thing was really a setup. When the municipal government did not hook up sewage systems, when they did not put roads in there that were paved, what they ended up doing was saying, well, see how they live.
Mhm.
But it wasn't their fault.
It wasn't their fault.
So it was a false narrative to begin with that was forced into being the narrative by the people, the white people in the community that wanted to take that land.
In line with what you're saying, and I think I heard this from Ms. Hattie when she was talking to our group. When they same line, they paved the street. I think Finley Street is what it is, but they stopped right
there,
right where Linnentown began.
Yeah.
And so, nice paved streets and then boom, dirt road to Linnentown community, which yes, contributes to the concept of the slum and a ghetto. The only other thing that I would highlight for this moment is that we really kind of zeroed in on telling our students that urban renewal, eminent domain, is the government's opportunity to come in and take land, take what they need for whatever purpose they have. This instance, it was expanding UGA, calling it urban renewal, making things nicer and prettier. But it was the compensation side of it that I kind of wanted to focus in. It was pointed out through UGA special libraries collections that the outside areas outside the Linnentown community, the white neighborhoods surrounding Linnentown, but they were displaced. They were given fair market value. Back then it was $11,000, whereas those within the Linnentown community, less than half that. Which I think translates today to millions of dollars of
$5 million
wealth stolen from the descendants. And so we threw that out there to these kids. And the question is, what are your thoughts about that? And that's kind of the guiding question that I had in my classroom. What are you thinking about this? And, kids are just like, that's just, it's wrong. Never heard of this before. And and it's trying to connect that timeline. This didn't just happen then. There's things, the ripple effect is today, go home and talk to your parents, because most of your parents were kids. If they grew up in Athens, they were kids when this was taking place. Your grandparents were very, mature adults while this was taking place. Go home and ask them. And I had so many kids come back the next day going, yeah, they remember something about a ghetto getting torn down. That was, and that was probably the closest of it to an acknowledgement from the student. Most of them were just like, yeah, no, my parents never heard this. My grandparents didn't know this. They remembered the university expanded.
Right.
And that was all they remember. And so even our community members at that time were just kind of ignorant to the facts of what took place. And so feel free to jump in.
Sure. I'll pick it up from there and just say that that what Ethan just talked about inviting students to take that information, that question home. But we can ask students to do that every day. It doesn't happen very often. So when they come back and say, like, I talked about this at home, that's how like, this is something that is important and something's been enlivened in their mind, that they remember to take that thing home from Mr. Smith's class, whatever time of day that is, and talk to a parent or a guardian about and bring it back. Like, that's how it's powerful. And so I just so many kudos and props to you guys at Clark Middle for doing that. I think, yeah, the thing about naming names is, so in history textbooks, like along the lines of like the highlighting Black suffering and trauma, is that the other problem with that is that it's not explained with a perpetrator. So it just happened that there was enslavement. It just happened that there was urban renewal programs that decimated Black communities. And so it's often presented and written without a perpetrator. So there's no subject of the sentence, like there's no actor. So it wasn't, and so when so at UGA, I put up the letter from President Adderhold talking about the slum area on the other side of Cloverhurst, because Adderhold's name is on the building where we have class. It's Adderhold Hall. And so, and now the college is now called the Mary Frances Early College of Education. So we have that. Right above that is Adderhold Hall. And so it's this very present thing. And so when Ethan said like naming names, it's like, that's the university president writing on behalf of his interests, you know, and with no regard for the folks' lives that's being impacted. And I would say the same thing now. And I know that one of the frustrations is about UGA's unwillingness to come and talk to the Linnentown Project folks. And to me, it's like, so like naming names, like that's Jerry Moorhead. Jerry Moorhead has the honors college named after him. He's the university president. And so it's like, there are people in the community who are making choices. I don't know Jerry Moorhead. Like, I'm not saying any qualifying statements about him one way or the other. The point is that there are people within these systems that are making decisions all the time about doing this and not that, and this rather than the other thing. And so it's just like when we're if you're ever in a space for like, and I said like mostly for white folks who I'm working, is that like we are in the systems. What we need to pay attention to is like, what levers can our hands reach from within the structures that we occupy? Not blame it on someone else. Not say, well, if this changes, then I'll do, like, what can I change right here? You know what I mean? And so like recognizing that the structures are in place, but people make decisions within them.
And it's really strange that 13-year-olds, I think sometimes, or at least my 13-year-olds that I've taught, recognize that better than some of the adults. You know,
Wow.
When we went through the Moorhead letters, you know, to the Linnentown Project and basically their rejection or lack of acceptance for the findings and all of this, you know, one of my students, I mean, came right out and said, that's the dumbest thing. Like, why would he deny it? Like, it serves, even to the fact of just, it serves his interest to acknowledge it. It would have put him on a different playing field from everybody else, other than to, you know, rather than deny it and say it didn't happen like that or whatever, take some ownership and move forward that direction. And so 13-year-olds recognizing.
Yeah, and one thing I think that adolescents key in on real well are issues of fairness. Like any small injustice, enforcement of dress code or late policy attendance is felt equally as intensely as the greatest injustice that they have. So just by way of compare, like I'll just say that, you know, there are tensions in teaching Linnentown. And so what Ethan did is I think what most of us have to do when we're teaching about Linnentown, classroom-based lesson where we present information and then elicit students' reactions, like help them narrate their own emotional like awareness about what it is to learn about things happening in their community, what roads they probably walked, and help them sort through that. Another option, and the one that I was fortunate enough, and I know other classroom spaces have been fortunate enough too, is to meet at Linnentown, to meet at Brumby Hall and with Miss Hattie and have her walk students around. And for a lot of students, those are the dorms they lived in. And so the power of the place is extraordinary. Just watching students reorient their relationship to their own personal history of being at the university through the testimony of Miss Hattie and the testimony of her displacement from her home and her family, you know what I mean? And so this is a question, I think, for our community of educators, is that like, Hattie can't be every place all the time and can't do 20 classes a week. And so she and I have talked about this as something I'm very curious about, is like, what are the various things that we can imagine doing and carrying these lessons forward? And I just want to share that like what I'm working on right now is compiling all the lessons that people are using in Clark County and area schools. And I just have a few listed here. The Linnentown project, obviously, being the leaders, the Mosaic, the Quilt project, community mapping projects in the geography department at UGA. The Walk of Recognition is part of the Linnentown project. Historical memory team, Hattie, if you're there, you can correct me. And then all these schools. And so, I mean, mainly what I want to finish is what I started with, is that like people are teaching about Linnentown, and they're doing so in creative, justice-minded ways that involve implicating all of ourselves in the ongoing struggle for human and civil rights in Athens. And so I just, again, want to thank Chaplain Cole and Mocha and the AADM for having us here tonight, and for folks joining us here and on Zoom. I just really appreciate everyone being here together. Wrap it up there. And if there's any questions or comments or critiques, I'm always open.
I think one thing that would have been like really great, I'm thinking of like, as I was like a high school student, what would have been really wonderful.
Oh.
You can hear me now. Would be to like visually see Linnentown. And I mean, I still feel like that now. Where at like, because I mean, I came from CCSD to UGA, so like I understand like the area that it's in, but it would be really nice to like actually be able to visualize like what that area looked like. And I know that would take a lot of mapping and a lot of work from like several different kind of departments, but yeah.
We have it. We have
Yeah.
it.
I'm listening to, it still is. For years, they try to make it seem like, you know, people that are into activism, voluntary, that mobilize, like they're the troublemakers. But really, we're the changers. We're the ones that bring, if they did not continuously talk about this, continuously mobilizing. So as a student, it's like I present to the class, you tell them about these things, but what next? What do I do?
Right.
How can, it's like even with Dr. Joseph Carter, he's a white man. Hattie's a Black woman. This is an example of the power of what can happen with race relations. You can see yourself in Miss Hattie. You can see yourself in Dr. Joseph Carter before it even became to the mayor and commission, because it would have never came to the mayor. I remember, I couldn't even believe some of them didn't even want to hold UGA accountable to make them say that this was a racial act and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So the government is not where the answer is at unless you put pressure on them. So even when Mariah is speaking, she's that one person speaking, and I can look around the room and look at body language, okay? So you could tell that it's not resonating. So in order, these kids need to understand the power of their voice. They need to understand the power of being consistent and understanding to be able to see when another urban renewal or when the government is putting us in this position, what can we do? And to be able to identify before it happens, and then now they're 70 years old or 60 and be like, here we are again. Yeah.
You know, I will say to that, because one of the questions a lot of 13-year-olds have, or not necessarily questions, the comments is, I'm 13, what am I going to do? What can I do? And so we actually had Mariah join us over Zoom at Clark Middle to all of our 8th graders to talk about getting involved in the local communities at their age and utilizing things like social media and joining and other organizations, and following, how important it is to follow community needs, getting involved, that, inform yourself, get involved, and then utilize social media, find something that you're passionate about, that you care about, and dive in that, and then make those connections as you go, and as you get older, your activism develops and grows with you, but don't just sit around and wait till you're 18.
Right.
The research aspect, the valuable aspect of knowing how to research, and also to me, yeah, we're telling them at 13 because we have a group and we feel like what, but giving them skills to where they understand how to decipher through what is fact and what is not real. It's the basics of being able to navigate through that information and to find information and to do their own research. That is also making them powerful in understanding how to use their voice in a responsible way. So when you understand your rights, you understand the facts, the truth, then you don't have to wait till you're 18.
Right.
Until you graduate. You don't have to join a social movement. If you know what you're talking about, you have the facts, you do the research, you can act as I can see students be like, oh, okay, well, they make a point there. Maybe I need to look that up, and spread it throughout the classroom as well. So showing them how as individuals at the age of 13, 14, 15, 12, how your voice and the knowledge, what you learn and how you can deliver that can be meaningful and make a difference in that moment, not just when you're 18 or down the line.
Right.
So it's different forms of how these kids can make a difference.
Right. And if their only model is a picket at a march, they're like, well, that's not accessible. I'm too young. That's right. They're going to kick us out of the mall. So Miss Hattie, last word to you before we log off.
I just wanted to say that I thank everybody for what they've done to continue to raise awareness and on the work that has been done and still being done. This work is not over. We're in the middle of it. There's still a lot of work to do. The Black History Center, the amending the gratuity clause in the Constitution, all that is still going on. I'm still writing letters for the Linnentown projects, but thank you all for where we have come from to where we are today and where we're going in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Barb. So that's it. Yeah.